Did you know that there is a Native American tribe which has still not signed a peace treaty with the US government? Did you know that this tribe engaged the United States in its longest and most deadly war against the Native Americans? The Seminole people of Florida remain the only indigenous American tribe not to sign a final peace treaty with the United States. As a matter of fact, the Second Seminole War was America's most costly engagement against Native Amerindian tribes. The area where I live, Marion County, Florida, witnessed many important events in the Second Seminole War, especially around the site of the historic Fort King. In this video, we're going to talk about the Second Seminole War and the history of Fort King. Most of my viewers are at least partially familiar with European settler colonialism in the New World. Thus, I will spend more time discussing Florida and my local area specifically. When the British were in control of Florida, they incited Seminole attacks against American settlers moving deeper into Seminole territory. Another source of tension between the United States and the Seminole tribe was the sanctuary provided by the latter to runaway African slaves. In 1818, U.S. Army regulars, supported by militiamen from surrounding states, invaded Spanish-controlled Florida under the command of future U.S. President Andrew Jackson. This invasion pushed the Seminoles further south into Florida. In 1819, the Spanish Empire ceded Florida to the United States as part of the Adams-Onis Treaty. Florida officially became part of the U.S. 2 years later. The 1823 Treaty of Moultrie Creek called for the Seminole to cede millions of acres in present-day North Florida to the United States government, and allotted land for a Seminole reservation in Central Florida. In 1827, Fort King in present-day Ocala, Florida was constructed. This fort was built on the dividing line separating lands allotted for native quote-unquote settlement and land designated for the Europeans. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was passed, calling for the forced relocation of Native Americans to territory west of the Mississippi River. The 1832 Treaty of Payne's Landing, which came out of the Indian Removal Act, stipulated that the Seminoles relinquish their lands and move westward. This meant that the Seminole people of Florida were to be displaced yet again. Tensions escalated between Europeans and natives, coming to a head with the Dade Massacre of December 28, 1835. A U.S. Army formation comprising slightly over 100 men under the command of Major Francis Dade was ambushed by a larger force of Seminoles near the present-day town of Bushnell while en route to Fort King. Only 3 U.S. soldiers survived and only 6 Seminoles were killed. At around the same time, the Indian removal agent at Fort King, Wiley Thompson, was killed by Seminoles led by Osceola. These attacks marked the start of the Second Seminole War. Fort King was built in 1827, named for Colonel William King, the commanding officer of the 4th Infantry. Native tribal leader Osceola engaged in talks with the U.S. government at Fort King in an attempt to stop the forced relocation of his people. During the Second Seminole War, every major general and U.S. Army regiment passed through Fort King. In May 1836, the fort was abandoned and razed to the ground by the Seminoles. The following year, the fort was rebuilt. When the war concluded in 1842, the fort would once again be abandoned by the occupying U.S. troops. In 1844, Marion County was formed, and the buildings at Fort King were used as a courthouse and offices. Until 1846, the fort functioned as a courthouse. In the 1920s, the remains of Fort King burned down once again. In 2004, Fort King was designated a National Historic Landmark, and a reconstructed fort was opened to the public in 2017. For my service learning project, I spent time volunteering at a historical fort called Fort King in Ocala, Florida. To be entirely truthful, I was initially not very enthused about having to do this project. I felt this way because I was overwhelmed with work in other classes on top of my honors thesis that I had been working on for several semesters. Additionally, the fact that there were so many moving parts to this project added to my stress. Also, I had communication and paperwork issues which slowed things down before I could start volunteering there, compounding my stress even more. Most of the time I spent volunteering at Fort King was spent cleaning, organizing rooms, and moving things around rather than interfacing with guests. Most recently, I had participated in the Leave It Better program at the fort. This program was centered more around the groundskeeping and maintenance side instead of the historical side or social side. I used the time I spent in the Leave It Better program to take much needed pictures too. Some of my duties in this program included cleaning debris from the patio in front of the visitor center and cleaning the drain, sweeping and reorganizing the garage, moving hurricane sandbags around various points of the museum grounds, and disposing of trash around the fort, among other things. As a professional historian and as a member of my community, I can say that this project definitely enriched me, and it did give me a great sense of accomplishment once all my work at the fort was complete. While not everything I did directly pertained to history, I still learned a fair bit historically and professionally volunteering at Fort King. I learned about the fort's history and even more about the history of Florida while doing this project. I also acquired a deeper sense of social responsibility while volunteering at the fort. I am happy to have served my community in this capacity and to have assisted in the showcasing of local history to the people of Ocala and Marion County. What do you guys think? Are there any viewers from elsewhere in Florida who can share something similar? Can you think of any other Native American tribes who can boast similar successes against American settlers? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.